Hi, I'm Llawerch, and when I'm not studying archaeology, I'm living archaeology. Today I'm at Castell Llyn Iron Age village in West Wales, and I'm going to show you some Iron Age skills. Come on. Castell Llyn Iron Age reconstructed fort in Pembrokeshire, West Wales. It's one of the most special places simply because all of the buildings you see are built in situ. They're built within the exact post holes of the original buildings. So, welcome to my house in the Iron Age. Now, the fire probably was only allowed to go out on holy days. So, if we don't have a flint striker to create the spark, and we don't have matches, and we don't have modern Zippo lighters and all that kind of stuff, what was being used to create the spark? Well, I have the answer. These four simple pieces of wood are called a bow drill. It's the bow drill using basic physics. Hard wood against a soft wood, rotated with friction, that gives you a sawdust in one of the little grooves. And the sawdust heats up, becomes charcoal black, and eventually the temperature is sufficient to create an ember. Let's have a go. Do you see the smoke? Tell me you see the smoke. Can you see the charcoal? There. Okay, we have fire. So from the fire bow, the first ember onto the tinder onto your pre-planned little kindling, and then from the kindling to larger logs. Now we have flame, we can cook. Now, in the Iron Age, of course, there were no such things as potato, pasta, well, maybe in Rome, no such things as rice or quinoa, but you did need your carbohydrates for energy. That leaves us with one thing, and that is bread. And here we have a rotary quern. Two stones, two heavy stones, one on top of the other. And the whole idea is that the weight of the stone grinds the corn and gives you flour. Now there's a hole in the top of the rotary quern, and that's where you put the wheat germ. Okay. And then comes real housework. Now, what you can see already is flour. Still a bit gritty, but when we look at Iron Age bodies and we study their teeth, we see a lot of hard wear, and certainly that comes from the bread that they ate with little bits of grit in it. Now, before we make the bread, come with me and I'll show you how we made Iron Age clothing. Let's check out those Iron Age sheep. Soay sheep, Iron Age sheep. The Soay sheep, they've got a lot of lanolin in their fleece. That means it's a lot of natural oil. If you're going to make a cloak and you want it to be waterproof, you want it to repel water, you're going to make it from Soay sheep fleece. It's going to be lanolin rich. When water hits it, it runs off. It doesn't soak you, and that makes it far more comfortable to be as warm as toast in the Iron Age. Cute, eh? So, the big question is, of course, How do we get the wool from the sheep and make it into something I can wear? Well, this part is called sheep to shawl, and I'm going to show you how we do it. Come on. So the question is, how do we get one of these and make it into something as nice, warm and luxurious as this cloak? So what we've got here is raw, unwashed sheepskin. Doesn't look like something to wear yet, does it? First job you have to do is clean it. And you do that by placing it inside a cauldron, heating it up slowly from cold water to hot on an open fire. Don't boil it, and then once it gets hot, you're going to add some soap. You're going to stir it and then let it cool down, and all of the dirt's going to rise to the top as a scum. You're also going to get a lot of lanolin on the top, and you can use that for a number of things. You can reintroduce it to the wool later, or you can use it as a byproduct to make some soap. Yes, a Celtic invention, soap. We'll touch on that later. So once you've washed the wool in the cauldron, you don't want it to turn to felt, so it's important to let it go down to cold again. You're going to take it out, pull any remaining little bits of straw off it, and you're left with this. This is clean, pure wool. What you do now is you're going to probably give it to the children of the village or your house. You're going to make them turn it into nice little white cotton wool clouds like this. See that? What you're doing is you're breaking down the fibres. And by breaking down the fibres, you're ready for the next step. The next step is turning this into thread. And it's the thread that was done on the drop spindle. So I have my clean cotton wool cloud. I've broken down the fibres. I'm going to add it to the end of the fibres using spit. The spit bonds the fibres, brings it together, and then by twisting it together, we're able to use a drop spindle. The drop spindle is gravity fed. You spin, let go, and while it's spinning downwards, you use both hands to draw out the thread. You see that? Now this is an occupation that could have been done any time of the year, but was most probably done during the winter, in my opinion. And the reason for that is it's more important for you to be able to feel the thread between your fingers rather than see it. So in a dark roundhouse during long winter months, it's not quite as important as if you're weaving. When you're weaving, then you need daylight. So by drop spinning, with the drop spin, you're able to produce your first thread. Now this is the thread that's going to be refined, eventually dyed a different colour, and then woven on a loom. The warp weighted loom is predominant in the Iron Age, and I have an example of it in the house. I'll show you. Now, people seem to think that in the Iron Age they didn't have colour, and if they did have colour, it was very dark and foreboding. But what I have here is some examples of naturally dyed wool. The first one we see is woad. This blue is an indigo. This is your colour of woad. Look how bright it is. This next one is a mixture of indigo and weld. Weld is yellow, but look at this green. Beautiful, isn't it? Then we have, of course, the well-known madder root. That gives us a nice salmon pink. And then weld, of course, by itself. So just look at those colours popping out. Now, we really don't know whether everybody walked around wearing bright colours. Definitely colours, but here's some natural colours as well, which are earth tones. So you can imagine that a majority of the population would have worn some form of colour like this, if not the bright colours. We don't know whether you had to be rich to have lots and lots of bright colours in your weave, because of course you'd have to have a dyer, specialist job. You'd have to have textile made specifically for you and probably cut to fit you. So perhaps the more noble you were, the richer you were in the Iron Age life, perhaps the more colour you could afford to wear, perhaps the more complicated the plaid pattern that you would wear, perhaps the more fitted your clothes would be. We just don't know. But it makes sense.
Now this is an Iron Age warp weighted loom. Now we know that because along the bottom we see loom weights, and we find lots of those on Iron Age sites. Now it takes a long time to string a loom, and it takes a long time to start to weave a set plaid or design that perhaps is identifiable to your tribe. We just don't know whether the Iron Age people were identifiable as a tribe through the weave of their cloth, the colour choices of their cloth, or whether it was a case of simply the person who hung the loom did the looms in the village, and thus all of the looms produced the same style of textile. It's one of the great unanswered questions of Iron Age Britain.
So these earth tones, the madder colour, is probably typical of what the majority of people wore. But if you were a nobleman or a noblewoman, and you could afford the colour, hypothesis of course, then madder root, all of the different greens, but look at the weave, how complicated this weave was. Even in the solid colours you've got the herringbone. Now when you've lived in the Iron Age for any length of time, you start to realise just how drab it is. Lots of dark earth, usually a grey sky, mud huts. Gets kind of depressing after a while. Now all the ancient writers tell us that the Celts used to love bright colours, and it's only when you've lived on a site like this for any length of time you start to realise that when you see a bright colour it actually has a positive effect on your mood. So today I'm going to show you how to make Iron Age paint, so that we can paint our houses, paint our front doors, and the warriors can paint their shields. So let's go and have a look. So one of the main ingredients that you're going to need if you're going to make Iron Age paint is chalk. You're also going to need some linseed oil. Now the linseed oil is a byproduct of flax production. So when you look at a crop of flax, you look at the little seeds on the top, that's where you get the linseed oil from. You also need honey. Honey is a good binding agent for the paint. So what I have here is a sample of 4 pigments of iron ore. The ore that comes from the wall of the cave, of the mine that you're mining the stuff in, and it's different consistencies. So in other words, some of it you can go up to the wall of the mine and actually rub it off with your finger. Yeah, and you're left with the ochre. But others you need to go in with a chisel and a hammer and actually hammer it away. So I've got 4 different ochres here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to break up the chalk and make it into a powder. The chalk is going to be the base for the paint. It's not long before you realise that any form of work in the Iron Age means that it's usually hard physical work, very time-consuming work, and there's no quick and easy fixes. Now I've been crushing this for quite a while, but as you can see it's still quite coarse, and we need to break it down until it's a fine powder. So, after lots of hard work, I'm left with a fine powder of chalk. It's time for me to mix in the ochre into the chalk. So I've just added the ochre, and here's the second one. Now on the chalk you can see the two distinct colours. And now it's time to mix them in. And now it's time to add the linseed oil. So the last ingredient that we're going to add is honey. Honey's a bit of a binding agent. Not too much, but just enough to bring it all together. So we've made the Iron Age paint. What are we going to paint? This is a British Iron Age shield, made from 3 layers of ash that are glued together in alternate grain to give it strength like modern plywood. I've covered it on the front and the back with linen. The linen acts like a safety measure. It bonds to the wood, and should anything penetrate the shield, a spear, an arrow, you're not going to get splinters in your eyes. Okay? It's edged with veg tanned leather, naturally tanned leather, and it has a wooden hard spine on the front to give the shield the strength that it needs. When you look at the Deal Grave warrior shield, or the edging of it that's been found and you can now see in the British Museum, it's only looking at 5mm thickness on the shield. Lots of people think that the Iron Age shields were big, thick doors to hide behind, but actually it's a weapon in itself. I can hold it like this, so if anyone throws anything at me, I can deflect. Okay? I can push someone over with it. I can push away with it. I can punch with it. I can use the edge in the face, in the feet, in the stomach. It's a weapon in itself. If you give this to a 18, 19-year-old modern infantryman and let him play with it for half an hour, I'm sure he'll figure out how to use it in ways that we can't imagine, but the young Iron Age warriors would have known. So, we've got an Iron Age shield. Let's paint it with Iron Age paint. You know, up until recently, the vision of the Iron Age by archaeologists has always been based on tribes fighting tribes. The king of the hill fort in competition with the other king of the other hill fort. But in my opinion, commerce seems to be the one vehicle that is shot through the whole of society. Commerce eventually brings Rome to Britain for our wheat grain, our hunting dogs, our tin, our gold. But before the Romans, the commerce is still there, stretching back arguably as far as the Copper Age, maybe as far as Dacia itself. And I can't help feeling that perhaps the idea of warfare is only a ritualistic vehicle, a mechanism for society that is a needed part of the society, but it's not the whole story. It's commerce. It's one chieftain in one roundhouse, one village like this, being able to show he's not just king of his own hill, but he's able to trade with the Mediterranean countries. He's able to import red wine. He's able to import coral and turquoise, as many other things. When you look at the Welling Garden City grave that is now on show in the British Museum, you'll find very high status goods of no doubt a chieftain himself, perhaps even Cassivellonus, king of the Cassivelloni. But interestingly enough, if you look at those grave goods very carefully, there's no weaponry. It's a bit odd, isn't it? For an Iron Age society, an Iron Age chieftain with no weapons, whoever's buried in that grave is living the high life and he enjoys it. And he can only do that in a stable society, in a stable landscape, a stable heartland and tribeland, and using commerce.
Now, it's not until you wear the clothes and eat the food and live in the houses for an extended amount of time that things that you can't learn in the classroom or on the site come to you.
Now I've learnt two things about Iron Age and Iron Age houses since I've been doing this today. We know that the Celts like to wear lots of jewellery, lots of bling, bronze, silver, gold jewellery. While I've been doing something as simple as lighting the fire today, it's just got in the way. I just want to take it off. It's not helpful. It slides down your arm, it slides around your neck, it's uncomfortable. So what does that tell us? Perhaps that tells us that the people who did the hard labour and the menial tasks like lighting the fire didn't wear jewellery, right? The other thing that it's told me is that we have a lot of smoke here. Now people seem to think that there's a hole in the middle of the roof. Now in the 1960s, when these houses were being built again for the first time, it was tried with a hole in the roof. But unfortunately what happened was we had a through draft from the open doors taking sparks up into the roof through the through draft. Houses burnt down. So, by putting a top cone on the roof, in other words enclosing the roof, what we're doing is we're making pretty much a dead end for the smoke. But having built them with a top cone, having lit fires in them, having lived in them for a while, you suddenly start to realise that actually it's a very clever design. The smoke will go up into the top cone and it's going to fill the top cone eventually once the fire gets going. And two things are going to happen. It's going to fill with smoke so there's no oxygen, which means any sparks going up into the roof space will not live. They'll be put out because there's no oxygen. So it's safe. The other thing you can do, of course, is you can put meat, fish, cheese, anything like that up into the rafters and you can smoke them. So we don't know if they had smoke houses specifically or whether you smoked your own stuff at home. It keeps the house free from bug infestations. It constantly percolates out through the thatch and keeps it dry, preserves the thatch. So it's a very clever design. It may interest you to know that a lot of modern thoughts about the Celts show us with big iron cauldrons in the roundhouses, ready to cook large suppers for many champions and warriors. However, archaeologically, it's not a regular occurrence. What we think is happening to the majority of people in the Iron Age is they're simply cooking with earthenware pottery, because pottery is the one thing that we do find on archaeological sites. Lots of it, especially in Iron Age fields. You can see that this Iron Age pot is blackened from the fire. You can do so much with these. Filling it with water and putting it on the edge of the hot embers later on when the fire's died down, you can actually get it to a temperature to boil the water. That means you can boil your vegetables, you can boil meat, joints of meat, anything that you can boil, you can cook in here. The trick is to use a damp rag and keep turning it every 20 minutes, every 10 minutes, every 5 minutes. Just keep an eye on it. You soon get an idea. Some pottery is better than others. Some pottery you can put directly onto the fire, and it's made from such a good clay with good grit in it that it actually glows. The bottom will glow red hot like a blacksmith's iron out of the forge. You can cook in these pots. So a lot of people don't realise that. The cauldron is certainly, in my opinion anyway, the tool of, or perhaps a status symbol of somebody who's well-to-do. We don't need pottery, dear, because we've got some ironware. Now, do you remember me mentioning the soap earlier? With the sheepskin lanolin, it's a byproduct. Well, here I have some soap. It's made from goat's milk, honey, and lanolin. Perfectly capable use for washing your hands. The Romans thought we were, us Brits, quite barbaric for having soap. You can also make it with lye, ash from the fire, and lanolin, and lard, but I really didn't fancy that. So I'm just going to wash my hands before I make some bread. And what I'm using here is chamois leather, really soft leather. It's perfect for use in an Iron Age village. So you remember when we used the rotary quern earlier and we made the flour? Now it's time to make the Iron Age bread. They didn't have yeast in the Iron Age, it was naturally occurring, if at all. So they tend to be quite flat breads, unrisen. We don't have, unfortunately, an Iron Age oven in here, so I can't show you how to bake in the oven. But what I can do is show you how to make the bread, and then I have some that I prepared earlier to show you the finished article. So I have a mixing bowl, I have my flour, it's about 2.5 cups. I have a very rare commodity and expensive commodity in the Iron Age, salt. Wars were fought for this. Roman soldiers were paid as part of their salary in this. Give it a mix. This is great to do at home. About 220 on your oven for about 15 minutes. Middle of the oven. So now we're going to add the water. Okay. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to press them out, put some air into it. So knead it in the hands. It's great to do. And then when you've kneaded enough, you're going to very quickly, before your hands get too hot, make it into just a little bite-sized piece of bread, like that. So we've made our little Iron Age loaf. We made lots and lots of them, and I like to think that this was one of the last jobs that you did just before you sat down to eat, so that you had nice warm bread. So here's some I made earlier. whole wheat flour, salt, water, lukewarm, put it in your oven, middle of the shelf, 220, about 15 minutes. Iron Age bread. You can see it's quite flat, can't you? But it works. So good, I'm going to sit by the fire now and eat some. Yakida, good health. Now inside this building, this is the Granary building. The granaries we find lots of evidence for on Iron Age sites. We suppose they're granaries, we really have no other explanation for them, but they do make sense. You do need somewhere to store your corn, your wheat, any of your dry thatch, just to keep it dry away from rodents. There were no rats, of course, in the Iron Age. We believe they came over with the Romans, but certainly mice, certainly squirrels and all that kind of stuff. You don't want it to be eating any of your food, any of your seed stock. And so this is where you'd have stored things. The building itself, the floor, there's lots of gaps you can see the daylight through, and that's actually typical and meant to be, simply because we want the airflow to go through, but we want to keep animals out.
Thanks for joining me today on my Iron Age journey. I hope that some of the information has been interesting for you, and if you've enjoyed this today, please subscribe, click the like button and hit that notification bell. In the future, I'm going to be developing this site and I'd like to take you with me.
So that was the Iron Age. Not dissimilar to our age. Certainly the people were the same. Hard days of labour, toil, hard work, hard physical effort, just to do things like make bread, to live. But I'm certain that in these central hearths, in these great houses, at the end of each day, our ancestors would have met together, talked together, sung together, made each other laugh and told jokes together, and no doubt probably drank together. So in honour of the ancestors and in honour of the Iron Age, cheers.